Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm actually a senior at Georgetown University, double majoring in government and psychology with a minor in French. A lot of the work that I do in terms of like criminal justice reform and things of that nature has been informed by my own personal identities, the identities that I hold as a woman of color, and seeing my community, like members of my community, disproportionately be affected by basically the racism that occurs in our society and the willingness and ableness of certain members of our community to kind of attack my community. And so I began tutoring through this program that is completely student-run called Prison Outreach at Georgetown. And we basically go to jails in the DMV area, specifically Arlington, Alexandria, and the DC jail. And we tutor courses on GED for students who are trying to get their GED that are incarcerated, creative writing and literature, which was a program that I started my sophomore year. But I found myself throughout, being a tutor that I was actually learning a lot more than the students that I was working with. Every day was a day that we got to learn from each other through experiences, and it was helpful that I could relate to them. My family's actually from Honduras. I'm actually bilingual. I speak 4 languages actually, so I'm multilingual. But I had some students that I was working with who were Spanish native speakers. And so just seeing the time and effort that you put into trying to connect with one another makes a really big difference. So if you know that there's a skill set that you have that might be needed, it's really important. We need a very diverse pool of students and individuals who go into incarcerated spaces, just because you never know who's on the other side. A lot of the students that I worked with, they weren't Catholic per se, but that shouldn't matter. A lot of them were actually Muslim. But I found that through faith, throughout those experiences, that we were able to share very briefly, because we did have like a set agenda that we had to kind of follow, or like a plan that we had to follow. We were able to talk about life experiences through the stories that we read, and then also think about grander themes, such as God, such as love, such as death, and things of that nature. And so that led me to want to be in a program that would allow me to actually be a student and actually call myself a student alongside incarcerated individuals, instead of saying that I was a mentor, because they were also mentors to me too. And so I joined this Georgetown program called the Georgetown Prison Scholars through the Prisons Justice Initiative at Georgetown. It began, the video is going to talk about it a little bit, in 2018 as a non-credit bearing course that were offered to 34 students initially. And then it has expanded into a credit bearing program that I'm actually a part of currently. And the class that I'm taking is called Prisons and Punishment. And we look at basically the history of mass incarceration from slavery through convict leasing into Jim Crow laws and into laws today that actually kind of increase the disproportionality between people of color being incarcerated. And I don't know if the video was, okay, I was just trying to
I want to thank Johnsenia for being part of this program. I've had the opportunity to be part of these classes, and it is just amazing to see the energy and the dynamic. I mean, I knew, as I made a comment when I was in the class, I needed to take a class to keep up with the kids. I needed to be ahead of them because they were devouring the information and the brain power. And other scholars that I've heard that have been there, they said, in all my years in Georgetown, that I met the brightest and the most emotionally mature people in my class in Georgetown scholars, and those are the ones behind bars. So it's just, it really shows you the quality and who we are warehousing, and just a little investment, what the results are. So I thank you very much for your ministry. There's another ministry that there's a poster in the back that is a pen pal ministry. And the Knights of Malta, the Order of Malta, the Knights of Malta, have made prison ministry one of their priority ministries. And they have developed a program. So Dani is also has the history she's going to talk about being a pen pal. But I just wanted you to know that there is an opportunity and a means. They have many people that are waiting, pen pals, and people that want to be corresponded with. And that's a very easy, we're talking writing a letter a month, to somebody and just corresponding and giving them, just talking about life. Dani's gonna talk about.
Yes, hi, I'm Dani Clark. I live here in Washington, D.C. I am a member of a faith community called the Community of Sant'Egidio. And through that community, I came to be aware of an opportunity to write to someone on death row. So I have a friend on death row in Texas. His name is Ivan Cantu, and we've known each other for 15 years. I started writing to him when I was 29 and he was 31. Back in 2004, he had been in prison for 3 years.
But you can increase the volume.
And we know each other through letters.
You can do the
Brought.
directly here. Play it directly here. Oh no, you can't.
This is our friendship. These are all the letters that I have received from Ivan since 2004. And he has the other side of the friendship, he and his wife actually, because he has mailed them to his wife for safekeeping. In the Texas death row, they routinely clean out cells, and so they have to be careful about things. Now, Ivan very likely killed 2 people, his cousin and his cousin's fiance. He has maintained for years that he hasn't done it. I have doubts about that. But I am his friend. So what is it like to be friends with somebody on death row? And why do I do it? And what have I learned? Why should you maybe think about this? So as I'm saying, he is my friend. So we exchange letters about our lives. He talks to me about his life before, his life in prison. I have shared with him my life, having a child, getting married. We are really friends. I hope that he would say that our friendship has brought him companionship and hope and solace in the same way that he has brought that and so much more into my life. He and his friendship have opened up an entire world to me. And that is what following the gospel does, actually. It seems like a simple call at first: visit the prisoner, the sick, the elderly, clothe the naked. But it is generative beyond belief. Following the gospel in this way is eternal life for me, in that sense, that it has brought so much life into my life and continues to give life both to me, to Ivan, and to everyone involved in the fight against the death penalty in this country. I actually wrote to Ivan for 12 years before I visited him in the Polonsky unit in 2015. And Karen knows that place very well, and knows what it's like to go into a high security prison for the first time and come face to face with my friend and see him shackled and realize, like all of you were saying, that he is me. He is another human being. A funny story, I always remember the first moment that I saw him, and to see him, my friend, this person who sends me New Yorker cartoons and cards on my birthday and cards for my son's birthday and knows everything about my life. To see this person come in shackled in the way that he was, I started crying. And he comes in through the in Texas you can't touch the person, you can't shake hands. There's a plexiglass. You have to talk on the phone. And he's, it's okay, I'm so happy to see you. He was smiling, so there was someone in prison making me feel better. And this experience of writing to him has opened up so much more in my life. I have become very active in the fight against the death penalty and for a more restorative justice system in this country. I wouldn't know Karen if I didn't know Ivan. I wouldn't be here if I didn't know Ivan. I wouldn't have written stories in the National Catholic Reporter, American Magazine. I wouldn't have been, Thursday night in front of the Supreme Court to vigil for stay of an execution for Rodney Reed, who was also there in Texas death row with Ivan, I wouldn't know people like Bill Pelkey and George White and all of these amazing people who are banded together in this fight against the death penalty and for a more restorative system. We are all tethered, I would say, by this hunger and thirst, like it says in the Bible, for justice. And because we have all been touched by one person. Now, the friendship, not all friendship in general is not always easy. Your friends that are not in prison can be hard to be around or difficult. You don't know what to say, what to think. And it's the same with Ivan. Right now I'm living through a process where we disagree on how to go forward with his, he wants me to be more vocal about his innocence claim. I don't think that is the right thing for him right now, but we're working through that. I'm working through that, with his wife as well. And I know that, I hope not, I've steeled myself already for the thought that I will accompany him to his execution. I have hope, but at the same time, Texas doesn't give me, it's Texas. So, and that's a helpless feeling, really is. But again, I'm lifted up by the other people and by you being here today, by your hunger and thirst for justice. So I would just end by saying that if you have this hunger and thirst, maybe you too want to write to someone in prison, whether on death row or in prison. There's the Knights of Malta, the community of San Egidio also has a program, Amnesty. There are many ways to do this, have this connection with somebody who is incarcerated. And maybe like me, you think in the beginning that you're just doing something nice, a charity. You're visiting the prisoner, helping the sick, and I hope, like me, you will discover how much richer the kingdom is than you thought it was when you started out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dani. I know Dani through the San Egidio community, but also the Town program touched my family too. My youngest son is a sophomore in high school, started writing someone. Unfortunately, he was a freshman in college at St. Louis University when James Aldridge was executed. So I attended with Sister Frazier and myself, accompanied my son. But the life-changing piece is this: he was not one of the student body president kind of guys, but he, in his high school, he said, one came down one day and said, I'm going to Austin and I'm going to testify for James. And I watched this, just average kid get up and he just said, I go to a Jesuit high school. I have a good father. I was not looking for a mentor in life. I did not need a male role model. But I found somebody, and somebody on death row taught me the value of family, the value of freedom, and the gift of nature through letters. And he said, and he's doing the same for those that are there with him. So why are you killing him? And so it was very powerful for a young kid to stand up and do that. And I was impressed, even though it was my son. I just saw what a change, and I'm grateful for that. And unfortunately, we did have to, it was Texas accompanying him. So I'm going to hand the mic over to someone that I'm also very impressed. These are all my heroes here. Katherine Getek-Soltis is a assistant professor at Villanova, and she has a lifelong involvement in prison ministry. And so I hope you can explain more about it on that too, and share the ministry.
Thank you. It's good to be here. So I started as a reluctant prison minister. I first encountered, I first went into a correctional facility when I was doing a year of service. I was with the Franciscan Volunteer Ministry, which is a great program, which you can see in others. That was my first time being to a prison, and I was involved in tutoring and mentoring some women, and it was just remarkable. I loved it. The humanity, these women just wowed me. I had never experienced being in relationship and just the mask raw off and this raw humanity was present, and it was such a gift to me. However, I was just doing the tutoring and the mentoring. There was an option to be involved in a Catholic prison ministry, and I decided I did not want to be a part of that because I just had this sense that prison ministry is about going in and telling people Jesus loves you, it's all going to be okay. And it felt it must be superficial, and it felt manipulative. I mean, I wasn't basing this on experience. It was just what my sense was, and I felt like education that made sense, but I don't know about the ministries. So I went on to graduate school and in theology, and really wanted to get back into prison setting, and I felt a call there, and the only way I could really do it was through a prison ministry program. So I said, all right, well, I'll do this. I don't know about it. And I ended up just helping out with some communion services with the segregation unit, and it was protected custody unit, and it was really enlivening. And I realized there was more to this than just some cheap theology, cheap grace. And the men there really were so hospitable and helpful. And so as a reluctant prison minister, I had the opportunity of working with Father George, who was at that same facility as a chaplain. And when he moved on, he ended up to take over as the lay Catholic chaplain. And it was just several years I worked there while I was a graduate student as the lay chaplain, and it was a transformative time in my life, and it transformed lots of things. It transformed my doctoral dissertation and what I wrote on and what I continue to write on. But the relationships that I had there, that the men and women who were in that facility welcomed me into their lives in just extraordinary ways. And I wanted to share with you briefly a story about one gentleman, Johnny, and he was reluctant in his own way in his relationship with religion, spirituality, and God. And I would go up to the unit for these men. They were in protective custody, and so they couldn't come down to the chapel. So I went up there, and we would sit around a little metal picnic table right there in the center of the unit. The cells were along the edges there. And we would do communion service. And the first few times I came up, he was sort of watching, and then he finally decided to come over and be a part of it in subsequent weeks. And over the time, the weeks and the months, he and I got to know more about each other, and he was really this interesting person. He actually told me that he once had visited another facility, and he had the county facility, and actually escaped, and that he got out and he jumped a car to go away, and he looked in the rearview mirror and he noticed that there was a stack of Bibles in the back seat, and he had actually stolen the car of a chaplain at the facility. But he sort of felt like God was always trying to get his attention. And indeed, right there, that was a fairly obvious moment for him. So he was sort of just keeping God at bay, but also drawing closer, and so he was really on this journey. And I had the privilege of accompanying him, and he came to me one day and said, "So Katherine, I don't know what to do, because I used to be in this in a cell with this man who had admitted to doing some pretty awful things, and folks are coming to me now, and officials are coming to me and asking for information, and I don't want to rat on people. It's not what we do here, right? But they're offering me good time." And he had a 6-year-old daughter who was told that he was traveling, and he desperately wanted to get back into her life. And so he was trying to figure out what to do. And if he got some good time for giving some information, he might get out sooner and get to her. And so, I didn't know what to tell him, and I don't have answers. I've been very humbled in this work because I haven't had nearly the experiences that these men and women that I've become friends with, they've had. And so the greatest wisdom that is offered is always from them to each other. It's not from me. I'm there just to be a witness, to offer concern. And so, we talked through it and said, just whatever you do, just know why you're doing it. And next week I came back and we sat down and he said, well, I went into the meeting and they said, are you going to tell us? We want to know, will you tell us information? And he decided to tell them. And then they said, okay, how much time do you want from us? How much good time do you want? And he said, I'm all set. And they're like, how much time do you want? I said, no, really, I'm good. I don't want to. And I said to Johnny, I didn't tell you to do that. I didn't tell you to report and then not get any good time. And he said, well, I needed to know that at least one decision in my life, I did the right thing. Not because I was going to get anything out of it, but just because it was the right thing. He blew me away. I mean, it was certainly something far more advanced than anything that we had talked about, and really he and other men and women who have shared their journey with me have shown me so critical in prison settings is the opportunity for men and women to do works of justice, to act out their own moral agency, to be people who are doing good things for others, not because there's anything in it for them. That's part of their expression of their own humanity. And we take so much away from people when we put them behind bars. But that is one of the most critical that we take away, is the experience that they have of their capacity to do good and to do justice. And that's why all these wonderful people are gathered here this weekend, right? Is to do justice, to be active, to go out and make a difference. And to take that away from our brothers and sisters as a scandal. And so I've been so blessed in my work in prison ministry. That was a story from my time in Boston. I'm now in Philadelphia, and I still get opportunities to go into the Philadelphia prison system and do community services there and work there. But being a witness to humanity, to brothers and sisters, and witnessing their capacity for justice and goodness is really critical. I'm also teaching a class at Villanova. I run a Center for Peace and Justice, and I teach a course called Theology, Ethics, and Criminal Justice. And students in that class have the opportunity to go in facilities like Johnsenia was talking about, and tutor for GED and so forth. And the students, I feel like always they have this shock when they go into a facility. They realize that the men and women they see are human beings. That's the first shock. And then the second thing is that they realize, oh my gosh, I was really not expecting to find a human being, right? What is it that allows us to assume that we're not going to meet another us, right? As Dani was talking about. And so it's really just, no matter how you get there, whether it's because you're tutoring, you're doing some mentorships and faith sharing, you're act in prison ministry with community services or teaching classes, whatever you're doing, it is ministry, and it is critical because there are human beings there that somehow we have allowed society to think are not human. And to deliver their humanity is not just to sort of be there and to witness and accompany, but it's also to create the moments where they themselves can exercise their own capacity for justice and goodness, the thirst that every single one of us has. So thank you for being here, and I hope that this moment will inspire you to get a much better.
We're going to try to make one more connection with the video, and just to link what she was talking about as far as those individuals that are in there that are able to radiate peace and goodness. I've had the opportunity in past work to work with exonerees from death row. In this country, we have 168 men and women that have been exonerated from death row, and but there are hundreds more that have been exonerated in their courses. So here at Georgetown, this is a course that is taking place. It's called the Making of an Exoneree, And Hashwin Singh was supposed to be here, Hashwinder Singh was supposed to be here today, but unfortunately his dad had emergency surgery, and so he was unable to be with us today. But we have a video.
Hello everyone, my name is Greg Mellor, and I actually now currently work with Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition, but up here to speak about an experience that I had about 15 years ago. I'll catch myself as I say I had. I'm still having it. When I went to Jesuit undergrad at Loyola in Baltimore, Maryland. I've worked with Jesuit universities and high schools for 10 plus years, and 2 grad school degrees from Jesuit schools, so it's good to be here. I'm familiar with the Jesuits pretty well. And I also did a year in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, so after my undergrad studies at Loyola, Maryland, I went in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and there was a position that really drew me to it. It was because of a class I had with a professor who went into Maryland State Penitentiary and taught philosophy classes. His name is Dr. Drew Leader, and he wrote a book on it and stuff, but I had this class with him, and I was blown away by this man and all the judgments I had about him. A skinny, white, nerdy looking, Dr. Leader, I love you, I apologize for these judgments I had of you. Guy who was kind of raised Jewish, but also was Buddhist and quite and all these different things. Like, how is he going to connect with men in a maximum security prison? And reading this book and hearing his stories, it was just like, how does that happen? I was just so blown away by it. So when I had the chance to apply for JVC, positions that dealt with prison ministry, jail ministry, really stuck out to me. That's what I ended up doing. I was a full-time lay Catholic chaplain at New Folsom Prison in California, just outside of Sacramento, for a year. And it's always encouraging and touching to hear other people's experiences of going into prisons, because so many things resonate. I think one of the greatest gifts for me during that year, some people talked about, Katherine mentioned her son experience with a man on death row and how he served as a mentor. I don't know if it was George or Dustin, or maybe somebody earlier was talking about the give and take relationship, right? I tell people, if you imagine an expansive beach and there's billions and trillions of little grains of sand on that beach, and if I was able to offer one of those grains to the beach that they gave me, I think I did a phenomenal job. That's how transformational my experience was at New Folsom. They were my teachers. I entered in with, I remember in the first JVC retreat, I entered into that retreat, and people are invited to come up and speak about why they did JVC. And I got up and I said, well, I was given this really privileged life. I had 2 loving parents, went to good schools, and I was shown so much love that I think like I'm supposed to return that love to people who didn't experience it. That was my judgment of people, which largely proved to be true, that I will be meeting inside of a prison. That many of them literally have never experienced love in their life. So I kind of went in with this altruistic-minded, 22-year-old, already ruined for life. From my experience at Loyola, JVC model used to be ruined for life. It's different now, but I was already ruined. I already had those experiences in campus ministry and volunteering and service trips. So I went in there, and it was far from the truth that it was. I do believe that I shared my love. I do believe that I offered some good things, important things. I offered myself, which was the most important thing. Others have hit on that what the men wanted the most was me just to be Greg. That's all they wanted. And it was the most refreshing thing in the world. I didn't have to put on a mask. and have to, some feel like I had to please people, which I had to do basically everywhere on the outside. I'm always, don't have to, I choose to do that. They taught me how to speak in accents and take accountability too for my actions. So I choose to do that. But all they wanted me to do is to be myself. But again, what they offered me, the love that they offered me is what blew me away. It wasn't, again, I believe I offered love. I can take ownership of that. But what they offered me continues, and this is when I said earlier that I had an experience, I'm still having this experience of those relationships, how they continue to transform my life. I just want to share one quick story and then take a 15-year shortcut to where I'm at now as a result of that experience. So when I left New Folsom, it was hard. It was really hard to say goodbye to you guys. A lot of, I'm in prison, and so there's a lot of held back tears, especially if I'm talking to guys out in the yard. You can't do that, and you can't show a tear. Maybe if you're behind closed doors, you can do that, but it was hard. I mean, it was one of the hardest things to do was to leave. And I was in a library, in the 8-yard library at the prison, with a guy named Aaron Burris. I was telling Aaron, like, this is really hard. Like, he's like, what's so hard about it? I was like, well, it's really hard to say goodbye. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, what? Am I speaking another language? Like, do you not hear me? Like, I'm leaving, I'm not going to see y'all anymore. And he's like, no. And Aaron's far wiser than I am, and far wiser than I took him to be in that moment. He said, don't say goodbye. And I was like, Aaron, like, I'm so confused right now. Like, what do you mean don't say goodbye? He said, just say see you later. He said, because that's all it really is. I took that as, whether it's in this life or the next life, I'll see Aaron again. So, 2 years later, a man who I grew really close with in the prison named Rick, 2 years ago, was released. I never thought he'd get out. He was released. Spent 30 years in prison. And a year later, so just last Christmas, he got married in Sacramento, and I went to that wedding. And during the night before the wedding, they had the rehearsal dinner and stuff, and I was invited to that. And Aaron was there, and I hadn't seen Aaron in about maybe 12 years since I last visited the prison. And I saw him. I'm going to start getting a little teary-eyed. I saw him wearing street clothes. I saw him with his beautiful daughter. I saw him with his beautiful wife. And I shared that story with him. Since that time, I've made the decision to leave working in college campus ministry, which is what I did for about 8 years, most recently at Xavier, and decided to move out to Sacramento to pursue full-time prison ministry. And I'm now applying for full-time chaplain positions in the state of California. I said earlier, JVC ruined me for life. It messed me up far more than ruining me for life. It would have, regardless of my placement, I think it would have ruined me, but it ruined me in a very special way, in a very unique way, because I had the chance to serve as a chaplain that year. One last thing I want to throw in there. One of the questions that I think somebody in the audience asked Ron earlier, I think it was actually maybe Father Jim, about, what do you say, or how do you respond to people who say, you're wasting your time, or they don't deserve it. Whether you believe that or not, whether, I believe in rehabilitation, and I would argue that the state and the country does not, but as far as institutions are run. But even if somebody believes that they should be, they deserve to be punished in there, the reality is that, and this number I think it's about 95%, depending on the state, the numbers of people who are incarcerated and are going to return to society are extremely high. So that could be your neighbor. That could be somebody that you go shopping and you're in line next to. So it makes sense that we do the best that we can to rehabilitate people so that when they return to society, they don't commit more harm. So I think that's a really key piece to answering that question as well.
Thank you for all of you for these stories, and we're going to have some time for Q&A, and so hold these thoughts as far as when we go to that, and I value and I appreciate the passion, and I want to introduce Minister Boyd, who is also presently going into the prisons in an Inside Out program, so it's another extension of this ministry, and if you could share with us your story and your passion.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I feel like this time spent here has been more valuable to me before I've even opened up my mouth. So I'm a student at Howard University School of Divinity. I'm bivocational. I'm an engineer by trade, and I got called into ministry some years ago, maybe about 5 years ago exactly. Today, as a matter of fact, this week, I did my initial sermon in a Baptist church. And so why am I here is more related to what I've done at Howard, but I want to give just a background on what's been my motivation behind this work of ministry in prisons. It's personal for me. I have spent time in every correctional institution in the state of Maryland since I was about 8 years old. I'm an adult child of an incarcerated parent. My father, through the byproduct of being an addicted drug addict, was in and out of prisons. And so if you're familiar with the Freddie Gray saga, I grew up right there. I'm Freddie Gray that made it out. And so it's more than just something to do, it's become a way of life for me. And so when I took this course at Howard, the Inside Out, under Dr. Harold Trulier, who I had gotten introduced to since I was at Howard through this work, the course really began to make it clear to me why I was doing this work. To be in the place where I was a student, just like the other students there, the inside students. We were being held, and they were being held to the same syllabus. So as students, you understand when the professor gives us a syllabus at the beginning of the semester, that's the contract. They were under the same contract. And the most phenomenal thing that happened is when we had to start presenting our papers in class. And our class was held inside DC jail, correctional facility in, I guess it's Southwest Washington, over by the old stadium. And these men were coming to class just as we were. Actually, a lot less logistics that they had to go through. We had to go through more to get into the class. But when we got there, someone mentioned it, the intellectual capital that we're losing in this country by the way that we deal with, and I like Ron Stevens, how he puts it. If you never read it, it's a good book for just mercy. And he talks about we judge on one mistake. And I would venture to say that if we all were honest with ourselves, that we probably have made a mistake that we would not want to be judged on that would put us in that same situation. And so the part of what I got out of the Inside Out that I think is of value to you is that in an academic environment, in an academic experience, you know, we share, it's like the stock exchange, we share our intellectual capital. And these men, we had to write papers every week. And they were coming in, and I got a full load, I'm working, and they were coming in just showing us up. I didn't even want to present my little paper. And it was just amazing to see. And one of the things that I realized, it's kind of out of scope, but the human spirit, the resilience of the human spirit is phenomenal. And so from that point, I think it's worthy of doing the work, because you gain an introspective about yourself and about the capacity of others. And you know, we could go into the data, the statistics, the history of our country and all of that, but I think the more important thing in this state and time in our country, that we could shift the narrative, that we could shift the history, is that we have this energy. I think what's the rapper that does the Microsoft commercial? Anybody know? Okay. Well, he talks about taking the wisdom of the elders and matching it with the energy of the young people. And so a space like this, where you have those of us who have been doing the work and those of you that are bringing that energy, when that happens, there's a combustion that will just change the trajectory of where this work goes. And so I don't want you to minimize your position, minimize where you are in context to where we are. It's equal. It's equal. We're in a place where we got to remove those type of barriers. You're young, I'm old, you're young, I'm maybe getting there. None of that matters in this work, because this is the story, and I'll get back to my notes to make sure I don't get off track. But there was one gentleman there, he was about the age of my dad, would have been if he was still alive. And he said to me, this was a fall course, so we got some snow. And he said, man, what I would do just to see a snowflake. See? Now he talking about feeling. He just wanted to see a snowflake. He had been incarcerated so long that he haven't even had the chance to witness snow. If you just imagine how could you have and yet was one of the best writers in our class. Did the research, presented himself in a way that was just, if you didn't know, if they didn't have the orange jumpsuits on, you would not have known that he was not a student of Howard University. You wouldn't. And so, some of the things that I do, in addition to that, there's an organization called Healing Communities USA, and that's a holistic approach to reentry. We interface with the family at the point of a crime, as a victim of a crime, during the trial, and after the person is incarcerated. We minister to the whole family all the way through the whole process. Some of that involves taking, in the District of Columbia, what happens is, because it's federal, those who will get incarcerated a lot of times, or most of the time, are sent throughout various places throughout the country. And so they don't have a close proximity. So one of the things we do is we transport. You know, I take a day and I just drive to Pennsylvania. I drive, to the Carolinas so that they can have a visit with their family. Recently, we've been able to use an app, Flickshop, where you can take a picture and send it via a postcard, and it goes to the individual that's incarcerated. It was an app created by a former, a returning citizen. And he talks about, in that app, he talks about the genesis behind it is that when he was incarcerated, his mother sent him pictures, and how those pictures made such a difference during his time. And so it's a way that you can kind of pen pal without, with cheating, not have to write. Time is a very valuable commodity in life. And so one of the things that, and I just recently, I have a childhood friend of mine to talk about, which always reminds me about why I like Ron Stevenson's narrative about that one mistake. Donald Braxton killed a doctor in our neighborhood. He was 15. And him and my brother were like two peas in a pod. It was so bad that when it happened, everybody just knew that my brother was with him. And it just happened to be, he left the playground and came home, and Donald went with some guys that he normally didn't go with. Long story short, he is coming up. He was sentenced to life as a juvenile, and he's being considered to be released. But my brother has maintained a relationship with him. He's been gone to see him every month since he's been incarcerated. And one of the ways I do is I send him pictures of my brother's family through Flickshop. And then he goes out to tear with all the other brothers from our neighborhood that are locked up. And they kind of connect with what's happening through these postcards. So it's little things that you can do. Life coaching through reentry. CSOSA, the Community Supervision Organization in DC, you can be certified as a life coach. And so with that, you begin to connect up with the incarcerated before they come home through video, and you start that relationship. And then when they come home, you begin to help them navigate. I think the gentleman that spoke earlier talked about simple stuff. Like, I have a guy, when I first started doing this work, he came home, and all I did was take him to get his license and get proper credentials. It took me 30 minutes of my day to drive him, or an hour tops. Showed him how to navigate on the metro. Walked with him through the courts while he was trying to get visitation rights to be reconnected with his family. I'm not a lawyer. I was just a presence, a ministry of presence. So there's so much that can be done. It doesn't require you to have certifications, don't require you to be the great deacon or the high, no knock on the clergy, I have respect for them. But you can do this work with a heart to care. And so, let's see, I think I've covered all the things that I was asked to. And thank you for this time.
Wow, thank you. I appreciate every one of your stories. Now, I know that there was what happened was a lot of the grad students, they had a program for them, and they were drawn off, so that's why we had a little mass exodus. But we want to rely on the people here to please ask the questions for them. So our panel is here, and I know just in your questions, you'll spark more stories and more information, so we have a little bit of time left. So let's hear from you.
I was really touched by each of your testimonies. Thank you so much for sharing. I know it's kind of hard sometimes talking about certain things, and like that brings a lot of emotions. I am kind of curious about how Georgetown started their program. I'm at University of San Francisco, and I can really foresee something like really like a lot of benefit for us to start a similar program. So also like it would be interesting like the class kind of setting, and also just like the ministry sort of setting, and like how you go about like starting something.
So it really had to do with, and I wish you guys could have seen the video because it got into like how it started, but really all it was that our professor Mark Howard, he's actually really big in the government department for comparative studies. So he's actually, his mother's from France, and so he's really big into comparing different countries to each other. And so he originally did that work, but he just couldn't live with the fact that his childhood best friend was incarcerated throughout that time, wrongfully incarcerated on top of that. He was accused of killing both of his parents, and it was a wrong accusation. He was exonerated while he went, to law school and things of that nature. So it actually was started because of that friendship that our professor had with his childhood best friend. And so what I urge you to do is just make connections and make relationships that'll make whatever work you want to do meaningful. A lot of the ways in which the work that we do stays relevant if it actually means something to us. So put yourself in those spaces to create and cultivate those relationships that will give you the energy to start a program like that. I know it was a unique situation. Professor Howard still cares about his comparative studies, but now he does it through the lens of criminal justice system. So he actually wrote a book called Unusually Cruel, which talks about how the United States is unusually cruel in the way how we choose to punish individuals. And what he does is he actually compares the United States to countries of a similar, with similar GDP. So he looks at France, he looks at Germany, and I think he looks at Great Britain too sometimes, and kind of sees where the discrepancies are and what's happening. And it turns out that the root of everything, which we read in comparison with other books, has to do with our history and our unique situation that we found ourselves in 300 years ago. So if you're interested in that. So he took what was important to him in the past, and he took what he was really passionate about but didn't get the opportunity to explore, and he kind of mended the two together. So just stay true to yourself is what I would say at the end of the day, and find a way to make everything you care about work.
And also, I know you myself, so
Okay. Cool, yeah, totally.
And the key word that Johnsenia talked about was relationships. And it's in reaching out to the prisons and seeing the need and beginning the relationship between the university and the prisons, and then and cultivating that desire to do education. And I think it was Dr. Ron Garrett that made the comment as far as that, we go through these pendulum swings as far as from retributive to restorative modes. And he said he was on the tail end of the retributive in his time, and we're seeing this coming back, and it is dawning on us very slowly, the fact that the retributive does not work when we have a recidivism rate of 76.6 in this country. So we have to give people tools when they come out so that they have options. And so, and it's education. And I will venture out to say that yes, we need to educate them, but we also need to be pastorally there and present with them and address the issues of addiction and abuse and restoring people to wholeness as we are doing this education piece. So it should be at 2 feet, that's our 2 feet of justice piece. And so to give them the tools to do it, but also the community and the emotional support. So as we're looking into doing these educational programs, the ministerial point, as Minister Boyd could attest to too, is so important. So it's all in. And then the other piece to this is that many people are affected by incarceration. It's not just the person that's behind bars. The rippling effect, as you spoke to and made reference to, is the children. And in Johnsenia, there is another, can speak to this too, but there's another program at Georgetown in the community of social justice where they're mentoring the kids of those that are incarcerated. So even if we can't establish the program within the prisons, we can working on it, that they can tap and start working with the kids that are in that ministerial pieces, or even as a program with the holidays, getting gifts to the children and to the family. So that the key factor is that when they come out, as Ron was talking about, the 3 pieces, that familial bond, which they lose because they don't have the means to communicate, just figuring out programs that can be conduit, transportation to the prisons, which they do well in California, the kids on the bus program. So there's many facets of areas, and every one of the pieces helps.
I just wanted to speak to the children part.
Please.
Part of what we witnessed with the saga and the Freddie Gray thing in Baltimore, I didn't have, I was a child of an incarcerated parent, and there weren't any programs that was allowing me to really speak to that shame that I carried and that guilt. But what we did have that I believe is key to the success of my brothers is my parents had 4 sons, and two of my brothers are Hall of Fame athletes at their respective undergraduate schools, and myself, I could dribble, but I couldn't shoot. But I did finish. And then my one other brother has a successful entrepreneur. And why am I saying that? Because when you talked about the faith, what we had were praying grandmother. We had a praying great grandmother. And so don't minimize your faith. Don't minimize this gift we have of carrying this gospel, if you're a Christian. But whatever your faith is, don't minimize that. That is a powerful weapon. We grew up United Methodist, and in that context, we have altar call every Sunday. And I used to be so embarrassed, like, why is it my grandma has to go up to this altar every Sunday? I didn't like it. But in retrospect, I realized that I'm standing on those prayers. She knew what we were growing up in, and so she prayed. So that in itself, we have this faith that can transform lives. So all the academic stuff is good, and all the programs are great, and we should do them, but always maintain that faith part in there. It's critical. It's critical. And for the children, that is such a valuable part, and I think the more that we can do that, the more that we can catch them and start changing their lives, the better off we'll be.
I just wanted to quickly add to on the CPNC website, and actually the address that's on the little postcards that we made for IFTJ, highlight a high school and college page. That's what we're trying to do. And for those who, I apologize again, I'm good at that, apologizing. The videos, watch them on your phones. They're up there. Go to the Georgetown Prison Scholars Program, Google it. You'll find those videos. They're really empowering and impactful. So, but the high school and college page does have, and we'll continue to add to it, some other ways that make sense for high school and college age students to begin to get more involved, actively involved in this type of work.
This question kind of came to me last year. I was able to serve as a Spanish translator in a detention center. It was an all-male detention center, and I was 16 years old at the time. When I returned home, I told my parents what I'd done instead of telling the man. And I told my friends, my experience, everything. The words surrounding it were just kind of like, oh, you're terrified. Why would you want to do that? How do we change that language and just stop to that kind of language when it comes to people who are incarcerated?
So, one of the things that I've learned that's become a very important part is changing the narrative. And so we look for big things to do it. You could be that voice, that first voice, to just speak. That's what you did. You went home and you talked about it, and you talked about it in a way of how it impacted you. And so now, each time, that's it. It's just speaking truth to power, but doing it in a way where it's personal. You're giving your story. That's the key. It really isn't a whole lot to it, in my opinion. But doing just what you did, going home, talking to your parents and your friends and telling them, yeah. Even if you were initially afraid, you could, just be authentic and watch how that begins to ripple. It begins to ripple. It's when we don't speak up, when we try to, I had that experience, but I know that I can't really share with them because, go ahead, share it. Because if they're really your friends, you're gonna find out then if they're your friends. When you start doing this work and going into spaces like this, it becomes clear who's your friends and who's not. And you need to know that anyway, in my opinion.
I know exactly how you feel. For the first 10 or 11 years of writing to Ivan, my parents, my brothers and sisters, and some of my closest friends had no idea that I was doing that because I was afraid to let them know, afraid of their reaction. Why are you writing to a man on death row, and all of the fears that could come up related to that. And I couldn't agree with what you were saying more. I found the courage to just start being open about it. So open that then I wrote essays that were published about it. And the curiosity and the, my mom especially, she was one I was especially scared about letting her know that I was doing this. She last night was asking me all about Rodney Reed, and she was sending me the New York Times article about it. And so you would be surprised, but it is your story and your personal experience that can change the hearts of someone who has the idea that someone in detention is a non-human, a monster, whatever. The language that is circulating now is just so abhorrent and so horrible that I want to give you courage to tell that story, because it's only people like you being open about it that can start to change
hearts. And that's how we do this. That's how we live the gospel. It's one heart at a time. And I also had fear of sharing about it because I didn't want to seem like a do-gooder. Like you don't tell people the good that you're doing. You think even today, there's still a little bit of that there. Like, what am I talking about me? I'm just doing this one little thing for one person. You minimize it. Don't do that. Share your story. Share your joy. Share your experience.
No, I mean, we shouldn't, I think, be surprised at the level of fear that we encounter, because I mean that's the narrative, right? That is required in order to have the system we have in our country, right? I mean, and it goes back, right? Johnsenia was talking about the history, right? I mean, this is how we can enslave people. This is how, because we dehumanize and we say that people are they're scary, right? They're a threat. I mean, that's how we've allowed ourselves to have so many outrages, so instead of being, I mean, we should expect that people are going to have that reaction, because that's the reaction that society requires in order to allow this, injustice. And so, and everything everyone said, that the only way that happens is by more and more and more people saying, no, actually, it's not what you think. I have a different experience. Let me tell you about it. I mean, I just want the walls of prison to be so porous, because every single person that gets in, and is in relationship and has a story, and then goes back out, that's one more piece. That's not just that person, but that's all the people around them. I mean, so I hear it in my students, like, it's not just the students I send in, but it's also their roommates in the dorms, and the conversations they're having, and they go back from Thanksgiving and they talk, it's critical, that ripple effect we're talking about. So, I've been lectured by a family member, Katherine, it can never change. It can never change. And I said, some people might not change, empirically, but we have to believe and pray, and as people of faith, we hope that everyone can be redeemed. That's our job. I think that's every human being's job, to hope in other people. And so whatever we can do to invite people to that, I think is critical.
There's another side of the story too, is telling your own personal response to it, as far as in doing the ministry. And I know I used to do the trying to tell their story, but then now I've found when people hit me up on that, I talk about, you will not believe how they ministered to me and how they have changed me, and the jewels that they have. And on a personal note, I lost my son 3 years ago, and it was due indirectly to alcoholism, and I have been working with a group of women, and I had gone through all the funeral process, all the family and the love and support, and over I heard, your relationship, well, you did all you could, all this. When I went and the ladies sat down with me and they looked at me and said, I didn't even ask it, but they knew, and they just said, you did everything you possibly could. They blessed me, and I heard it. And they're the only ones that could have done that for me. So it's not what you go in thinking you're giving, but it's what you get. And that's what we're missing as society, because they have been stripped and they are real, and you get the transformation and the gifts that they've got to give us, we're missing out as a culture.
So I think it's interesting that you mentioned, like, you were afraid to kind of tell your parents about the work that you were doing, because I had something similar, but like towards later. So when I first started tutoring, I was a freshman in college, and I told my parents because I knew that the people that I was going to be working with were people that needed people that spoke Spanish. It was kind of like, okay, I'm trying to help members of my community who are in here, who are not directly with me in communion, And so they were excited about it. They're like, oh, that's great, like you could practice your Spanish, blah, blah, blah. But then I took the course with the Georgetown Scholars Program, and I was telling my parents about an experience that I had. Professor Howard does a really great job serving as a character witness for a lot of the students that I'm in class with when it comes time for them to, like, you know, appear in court. And this was the first time that I had to deal with both victims of the family members of the victims, and then also the person that I personally knew. And it was a difficult argument that I had to hear back and forth, because the families of the victim were saying, of course, this person had nothing else to do. Of course, they're going to be programming. They have nothing else better to do than play with their fingers and look at the wall. And then my professor was on the other side saying, well, no, like, look at all these great things that they've been doing. And I'm kind of glad you mentioned, like, okay, cool, academics, great, whatever. Because I said earlier, and I prefaced everything I said with this, I personally believe transformation can happen without the classes. Transformation can happen through faith. Transformation can happen through a conversation. Transformation can happen through watching a video. There's so many ways that you can transform as a person, and it's really difficult to pinpoint a specific experience. It's ongoing, it's continuing. Transformation doesn't really end, it keeps going. And so I basically said, I'm kind of sad that this person has to be reduced to their accomplishments, because we're literally doing the exact opposite. Instead of reducing someone to the worst thing they've done, we're reducing them to all their accomplishments. And as a university student at Georgetown, I'm always told, you know, to kind of like protect, I guess, our ego, is that no failure can amount to all the things that we are as a person, but we're doing the exact opposite when it comes to people who are incarcerated. So I say this to say, understanding your privilege is really important in this work. I'm tremendously privileged to be a Georgetown student. But at the same time, when I walk the streets, no one knows I'm a Georgetown student. I could very well be on the other side, just being who I am, just looking who I am. So I say this to say, I talked to my parents about this experience, and my dad was like, but wait, like, did he do it? And I was like, that shouldn't matter what he did. Like, what? And then he just was like, he just was furious. He was just like, I don't believe this and that. Mind you, we're religious. Like, I'm Catholic. He's not Catholic, but I'm Catholic. And so at the end of the day, I brought it back to faith, because I knew that was something that he couldn't argue me on if he is actually a Christian. I literally said, Dad, I was like, do you believe in second chances? Do you believe in forgiveness? Do you believe in this, that, and the other? And so that was one thing that I thought was very powerful, because he can't, the argument was done. We can argue all of these things, you know, academically, which theorist was correct, this, that, and the other. There's a lot of different ideologies and beliefs outside, but when you go to religion and we talk about faith and you talk about redemption and forgiveness and all of these big archetypes that there's still mystery on and that there's still contention with, like, I would say use that. That was a great default that I used, and at that moment, my dad shut up and I won the conversation. But I would say use that, and also check them on their privilege too. Like, I don't know what your background is like, I don't know what your family has experienced, but just ask them, well, what are the circumstances that you're in? Imagine if you were in a different environment, how would you react? Because one thing that my professor always said, and always says whenever he takes the stand, he says, these are things that we can all end up doing. Like, we're all just as probable of being able, we're all capable of doing anything, any sort of behavior. What shapes what we actually end up doing is the people that we have around us, who's there to support us, the different belief systems that are implanted in us, the type of education we receive. So just remind them of circumstances. I think that's also very helpful too when you're having these conversations.
So you touched on a real key point that one of my professors that I learned from. He with faith, he always says, you know, well, just tell them that they got to give up their Bible, because Moses, what? Murderer, right? Paul, murderer. Jesus himself was crucified for committing a crime. If we don't get it anywhere else, we gotta drive the faith piece. And if they know a little bit about the Bible, then they'll straighten up in their chair and be like, okay, yeah, I guess we gotta do this.
Thank you. Any more questions?
what advice would you give to someone who's going to like a prison for the first time and to like do some sort of ministry? Just like,
I'll just share a quick anecdote. I was very blessed in that I had a really good mentor who was the head Catholic chaplain at the time at New Folsom Prison when I was a Jesuit volunteer. So he prepped me. He threw me in a little bit, before I felt like I was ready. But I remember the first day I went in and the C yard was on lockdown, which essentially means everybody's in their cells because there might have been a fight or a weapon was found or who knows what happened. And so everybody's locked in their cells until they tell them. So no yard time, and it could happen for weeks, could happen for months, who knows, depending on what happened. And so my first experience of meeting some of the guys was walking around to the cells, and this is a maximum security prison, it's a 180, so high security, 180 meaning that so the prison guards can see all the cells are like in front, so there's not like ones, a 360 would be cells all the way around. So we're going along, and he first brings me to a cell, Rick, who I mentioned earlier, whose wedding I was at just about a year ago. And there's a steel door, and there's a little slot where the food can go in, and that's basically where you can talk. You could talk kind of through the cracks of the door, but first time I met Rick ever, and he looks at me and he's like, "So are you scared?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Good, like that's what I wanted to hear." Not because he wanted to hear I was scared, because that was the truth, right? And I mentioned earlier, what the guys wanted from me was to be me, whatever that looked like. If I was sad, if I was angry, if I was happy, if I was joyful. And Father George mentioned earlier, and it's so true, or maybe it was Father Dustin, the guys in my experience, they read right through me. They read right through my mess. They know they can read people so well. So even when I tried to fake it, they would call me out. But be yourself. I mean, I think that's the best advice I think I can offer, and allow them to be themselves.
It's dramatic when those doors start closing behind you. Yeah, it's dramatic. They start clanking and locks. And, even though you're going to get out, it's dramatic.
But it makes it real.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It makes it real.
Absolutely.
It has your attention.
Yeah, get your attention. That's cool.
Yeah.
So this question can be for anybody, but I was just curious if any of you have any experience or idea of the connections between like a mental health or rehab facility compared to a prison, or if there's any ministries going on where people like us who want to like connect with somebody who may be like, different because of their situation, and like a mental health facility compared to a federal prison is any different.
Yeah, I've worked in all three, and because I went to doing social work at BC, and also worked at a halfway house for ex-convicts, which is rehab. Yeah, I think it's a different environment, and depending on what your skill set is, you could be helpful in any of them. Probably mental health, you might need more certification on some level, but in terms of addiction recovery places. It's particularly helpful if you come from the 12-step experience yourself, in which case you could start going in like on commitments to institutions and be part of the 12-step process. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
there is a difference. I mean, they're all institutions. The security levels will be different, and the accessibility might be more open for you. Are you an undergrad at this point?
I'm still in high school. So.
It's high school.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. Then certainly, perhaps working with juveniles would be a good place to start.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts here on the panel?
I was just wondering if you guys could like maybe give some advice as people who want to be involved with prison ministry and like advocacy for criminal justice reform. what's the best way that we can kind of amplify the voices of the people who are actually in prison, who are actually experiencing these things, rather than trying to speak for them in this context?
It's a mic dropper.
It's telling their stories. Yeah, it really is. You know, in working on the death penalty issue, it was when, you know, you can argue on, you can go and memorize all the facts and the stats and everything, and going out and trying to change people's hearts and minds with that, and all they do is argue back their stats, facts, and everybody leaves thinking that theirs are the right facts. So, but you can't argue stories, and as far as the personal piece and amplifying that, and it's letting people know who's in prison, and the people, and putting names and faces and stories. That's what makes a difference.
I quickly to that. People said earlier about the gifts, the capital of intellect and talent inside of prisons, and I found that to be so true. There are men in the prison that I worked in that are so much smarter and so much more talented, so much more gifted than they'll ever be. They're writing poetry, they're making art, they're making music when given the opportunity that's never been created before, and it's phenomenal. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll share poetry with people and not tell them who it's by, and they'll, wow, that was deep, that was really good. You know, who is that? What famous person is that? And I get to go and tell them that it's a man who's incarcerated in California. So that's one way too. You know, I just sharing stories. I love sharing music that I have from the guys. I love sharing their poetry or their stories in different ways. That's definitely a key way.
Some practical things that we've done through legislation in DC is one is remove the box. And so you can start to mobilize through voting and getting people into those political spaces that understand that the trauma that we are causing in our country, and that are willing to hear or at least listen to us. And so one of the things that we're trying to do now is we're spending a lot of tax dollars to house our prison population. What would happen if they had the right to vote? And so we're calling our congressmen and our senators and just planting that seed that, you know, right now when that pendulum is shifting for reform, start planting the seeds now to have them to consider. And how would that change how they thought about them? If in fact now that a huge part of our population who does not get the vote is now part of the political process. You know, one of the things that Dr. King did that was critical, I think, for the movement was the vote, getting the vote. And that's a practical way.
Yes, I mean, my friend in Texas wanted to have a voice outside, and he wanted his story to be told, and that was a gift that I tried to give him, and a tightrope that I tried to walk, considering that he says that he's innocent, and I'm not sure about it. I also have permission to share his letters, so if you want to see his handwriting and his letters, you may do so, and we've also helped to share essays that he has written. It's difficult with Texas. I don't know with other in death row, other prisons. Prisoners are not allowed to have a voice of social media accounts. They look for that and have you take it down. So it's a fine line to walk. But yes, I would agree with Karen. Tell the stories.
I totally agree with you. We're not there to speak in any way for them. That would be way too paternalistic. But there's a good example of help and empowering their voices is something called Ear Hustle. Have you heard of that? You Google Ear Hustle. It's produced at San Quentin, and it's produced by the guys with some outside people, and it gives you a really wonderful view into life in prison. Things like that that allow them to express to the outside creatively.
Well, I thank you. I want to thank this panel. I want to thank you for your ministry, for your passion for justice, and for just caring, and for taking the time to be with us and to share it, and to allowing us to video it and share it even in broader across the country. So thank you, Father George, Father Dustin, and Ron for kicking this off, and then the home run for taking this panel back. So thank you.